Recording. I saw everybody's posts on the discussion board. Y'all seem to be active and thoughtful and fairly good responses to each other. The first discussion question was just asking you to consider your position within the program. Maybe look at the courses that were ahead and things that might help you. Certainly you got some good courses coming up. You haven't had finance yet. I believe you're still going to finance. Is that correct? Is that your next class?
I think so, sir.
Yeah, that class there is going to really help you drill into the return on investment. You know, you got to figure out what your thing is. What is it that's going wrong in your process? And they'll teach you how to cost that out. Then after that, you're going to have business analysis, which will really take the stuff that you're getting from this course, the analytics, the key performance indicators, and show you how to present them into your presentation. We're going to talk about them tonight, how to gather them, how to identify them. It's by far the hardest part of benchmarking, and quite frankly, in the whole DMAIC process, wherever you're at in continuous improvement, defining the right metrics is the hardest thing to do, because if you're looking at the wrong metric, all your other work means nothing. You got to have the right one to measure to see if you're on the right track for improvement. All right, then the second one was the Integron case study. You guys did well on that. I enjoyed the discussion back and forth that you were having. Some folks were getting different answers. One I get most from that course is, well, what was it? Was it strategic or was it operational? And the overwhelming consensus from this group was that it was a strategic operational benchmark. Even though it only says on that first page there that it's a strategic benchmark, they're also doing operational as well. And you can mix them up. You can mix them up. All right, let's see what's in our lesson topic tonight. We got a lot of ground to cover, and this is my favorite lesson of the whole series here, because we open up new ideas to you, and then we challenge you with the assignments that are remaining in this course out of this one particular presentation. As always, if you have a question, just stop me and ask, and that's the best way to go about it. Here we go. I thought we were going. Come on now. All right, so we're doing for our topics tonight, so we're going to expand our understanding of benchmarking through case studies, which is the ALMAR. I hope everybody's printed that out, because I'll give you a jump start on that tonight. You just need to write down some things in the case study. We're going to review some tools that are available for secondary research, and we're assigning the individual tool homework. We have 3 assignments we're going to look at tonight: assignment 1, 2, and 3. We'll cover them in detail as we go forward. After you're done with tonight's meeting, you'll be able to solve the first 3 assignments problems. So you'll be well on your way in this course by knocking out the first 3 with the backing of the course material. All right, so we're going to discuss the importance of secondary benchmarking as a tool to understand the theory behind your process. We're going to talk about designing data collection for primary benchmarking, preparing data instrumentation, and then we'll delve into the ALMAR company case study, which is an individual part 1 assignment. So last week, we talked about there's many types of benchmarkings. If you recall, I showed you all these different companies and their steps. One had a 14-step, one had a 12-step, one had a 32-step, and here at NGS we had the 5-step model, which you all conversed about this week pretty well in your DQ1 topic. All right, we should understand now for sure, and you've echoed this in your responses, that benchmarking is a process that parallels the DMAIC process. And you're actually all able to demonstrate how benchmarking fits into your already well-established DMAIC process within your MVP. So well done. Sometimes it takes a while to grasp how the whole thing works. All right, so the idea of benchmarking is to help organizations think outside the box and develop creative improvements to the processes. We'll talk more about that next week with the HBR article called Creative Benchmarking, and we'll dig into it a little bit deeper next week. All right, secondary benchmarking supports primary benchmarking. In fact, that's the order. You have to do secondary first before you can go out and do primary. Secondary benchmarking is all about setting the stage for when you go to the facility to do your primary benchmark of another organization, whether it be internal, external, functional, or generic. All right, then we've only put the teaser out there so far that interpreting, understanding, and control of data are key to accurate benchmarking. So tonight, we're definitely going to talk about two data variables. One's called dependent variable, the other one's called an independent variable. And introduce it now, and we'll be going into it much deeper as the evening goes. All right, you guys all looked at this last week, and now you've had a chance to look at it, how it overlays your MVP project. But it's here's your eye chart one more time so that you can see what we're dealing with in this course. Last week we spent time on launching investigations, the possibilities. In other words, why do we benchmark? So this week I just want you to look over at the left-hand side where it says drivers. These drivers are really the reasons that your company decides to benchmark. We already told you there's two types of benchmarks, strategic and operational, and you can see them over there. All right, so you see strategic planning, so that's at the executive level, and you have operations performance review. That's the two common benchmarking drivers. Then slightly indented, you'll see continuous improvement efforts. And so if your company's dedicated to Lean and Six Sigma, you're probably integrating benchmarking along with your continual improvement process, which probably fits within your repetitive to make process. All right. And then there's times where you just sit back and you want to do observations of other companies just to spur your ideas along. So those are the drivers, and that's what those arrows are trying to say. Now, across the bottom of the screen, you see the green blocks. We didn't talk about this too much last week, but these are the deliverables at each step of the benchmarking process. So last week, we were talking about, well, we need to form a benchmarking team. Well, you've already done it. You're not going to do a physical benchmark, but you're already in your MVP teams. So instead of doing a benchmarking team charter here, each of you have your own MVP charter with a sponsor and a daily champion. So it's very similar to that. Next week, we're going to show you some ethics ethics conversation about benchmarking and how to get everybody on the same page. But you guys already have done that in your MVP project. So this week, this whole lesson is all about 2.0, organizing for the benchmark. So all the slides that follow and all the conversation that we do for the rest of this period really is about this 2.0. So the idea here is to come up with a full benchmarking plan, but you're not going to deliver on that. We've got you delivering just some ideas for a benchmarking plan. So you're not going to have the full on what it takes to complete a benchmark, just some of the ideas. All right, then in coming sessions, we have the reach out, and we're going to do that next week. I'll give you Almar Paint Part 2, and it will answer a lot of the questions that are in Part 1 for you. I'll just present it back to you with a slew of data, and then you'll start gearing up for how you're going to assimilate that information and then present it back. More to follow on that as the weeks go on. But right now, we're in 2.0 for this week. All right, so when you organize for benchmarking, you've been selected for the team. You're on it, 2, 3 people. You might even have as many as 5 people on your team. But the ones I've been on are typically 3-person teams, and usually have a subject matter expert in each of the areas that you're trying to benchmark. You might have a production person, an operations person, and a QA person. That would be a good mix for your team. But you've already formed, and now we need to organize. So I think I mentioned last week, if I didn't, I'm sorry, but benchmarking usually takes time. That's why we don't have you do it in this course. You only have 40 days actually less than that, more like 33 days to complete this whole course. So sometimes it takes 33 days just to get your charter signed. And sometimes it takes 6 months or longer to complete a full-on benchmark. So normally when you first start, you'll identify your team, and then you'll set up your ground rules just like you did at the beginning of this course for your MVP projects. You usually meet once, twice a week, and you assign parts of the benchmark out, and off you go, and then you come back a week later until you're done with this part 2, the organizing part. So the idea is to establish clarity for your problem area. You guys have probably struggled with this in your own domain process. One of the hardest things that students go through here at NGS is defining the problem statement within your MVP. Well, that's no different than in benchmarking. You've got to figure out what the problem is before you can solve the problem. Not only do you have to define the problem, but you also have to be a subject matter expert in what's wrong with the problem. Sometimes that's hard to be the subject matter expert when you're not exactly sure where in the process it's going wrong. So, all right. So you develop your problem statement. You become the SME, the subject matter expert, by knowing your current state that you're trying to improve, and identify the gap. So the gap, and that's a big term in benchmarking. The gap is from where you perceive yourself today. It's just, this is what our production is. This is what our faults are. On our best day, we can produce this. On our worst day, we can produce that. And where you measure the gap from is against another company's best and worst day. So the gap then is defined as the difference between you and your benchmarking partner. So, your best and worst day, you might have a measurement for that, but that's not the gap. The gap would be how you compare on the best and worst day to company X that you're comparing yourself against. So before we can identify any gaps, we have to know our current state, our yield rates, our ability to deliver on time, our readiness rates, our first yield pass rate, whatever it is that is the most important metric that we're measuring. So that's what you do in 2.0, is make sure you understand your process, and you're working with your what we call the senior champion and your MVP to define what those key performance indicators are. So they should know them. They should be actually giving them to you and say, these are the most important metrics that we have in our company, and where your project is going to improve is by improving a key metric. And then they tell you what it is, or you discover what it is for them, and then they agree to it. All right, next we're going to develop a list of areas that may be valuable to the project and include multiple opinions to include the leadership. So you've got an idea what's wrong. And what you're going to do next is you're simply brainstorming ideas that we could be looking at during the project. How can we improve this? Now, more to follow on the coming slides. So this is just a slight commercial break for you. Last week we gave you Team Assignment 1. Team Assignment 1 is due next Tuesday night by 11:55, so we can have it at the beginning of Lesson 3 next Wednesday. So what you're going to do as a team is you're going to draft a secondary benchmarking plan for the team. So what I've seen folks do is they would come together for their weekly team meeting, and this is probably a 20-minute exercise at tops. You're trying to produce 1 or 2 slides. Certainly if you have 5 members on a team, you'll probably need 2 slides because you need to show who's going to do this research. So the idea is to use the last slide I showed you, and you're starting to brainstorm what are some of the things we can be looking at in the MVP. So we showed you this last week. Here it is. You simply take this slide, copy it. You can have 2 of these slides in a slide presentation. You put a cover slide on there with your team name and your team member's name, and one person from the team uploads it to the Dropbox there, and then we will show this next week when we come in as a group. I will also comment on it before class next Wednesday. But the idea here is that as a team, you're going to sit down and brainstorm who's your potential topics for benchmarking. You look at your project, you see who you could do. So for example, the The C-130 group has a readiness issue for search and rescue. Certainly one that leaps off the table to me is potential benchmarking partner would be the Coast Guard. Those guys got to maintain it 24/7, 365. And then you come up with the other ideas. Well, if it isn't necessarily readiness, maybe it could do something with aircraft maintenance, right? Who could be our best person to benchmark against? And this is where you can get a little bit creative. All right, first thing that might jump out there says, well, I could do another squadron within the wing, or I could go externally. Maybe I can go look at Boeing, see how Boeing does it. Maybe I could go to McDonnell Douglas. Maybe instead of even looking at the aircraft industry, I could go for very generic. Maybe something. How does Amazon do maintenance on its shipping line? It could be something like that. Or how does the cruise ship industry do maintenance on their turnaround when a cruise ship comes into port? So this is up for you to decide. So first column there is you're determining what you want to look at. All right, next part is asking you, and this is the hardest part of this whole exercise, is what data do you have to suggest that this is important? So usually you're looking at a yield rate, and that's important, but there could be other measurements too. So that's what you're trying to look at. What other data is useful for us to study? And I'm going to spur some brain cell thoughts on that as we get into questionnaires, surveys, and interviews in the coming slides. So the idea here is, what kind of data do I need to dig out to study this potential topic? All right. Then from that, you're looking for what secondary sources might you use. Those are things like, I'll go to Google Scholar, I'm going to look up this company using them. I'm going to go to ProQuest. I'm going to look for readiness measures for the military. So you're just trying to identify right up front what secondary sources there might be. So in other words, if you're back over on column 1 here, potential benchmarking topics are the Coast Guard. What data do we have to suggest is important? Well, we have a 24/7 readiness requirement to get the aircraft off the ground in 20 minutes or less. All right, what secondary sources might we use? Well, I could do a generic search on ProQuest, which is a database you have available to you, and look up military readiness requirements. That's what would go here. All right, what search words would be helpful? Military readiness, and whatever else you can squeeze in here. And believe me, when you start working as a group, you're going to find all kinds of words in here to put in here. All right, then the next part is you need to assign it out to a team member. All right, I'm going to give you the second assignment here in a little bit, but every student will do six secondary research methods. And I'll talk about that, and I'll show you the template here in just a minute. Excuse me. All right, so that is what most students put in here. Some students, and you're going to see this slide a little bit later in the presentation, I'll define it all, but some teams are pretty advanced, and they like to even go a little step further, and they're trying to look at where they can get their data. That's what this is. Where do you get your data from benchmarking? And they might have identified an internal customer, and how cooperative would they be? How relevant would that information be to us? And then what level of breakthrough would we expect? I'll define this one a little bit more to you. But for your assignment next week, typically teams will show me this slide right here. Filled out with the team members' names of who's going to do what on the research, and then they all divide up, and that's how you do the follow-on assignment, which is an individual assignment. More to follow on that here in just a couple of minutes. More to follow on this here in a few minutes when I get to the slide that we'll have this filled up, and we'll show you how this works. It's actually pretty slick. So that's it for the commercial break. Back to our secondary research and benchmarking. All right, so when you're doing secondary research, you know that you want to compare your self to someone internally or maybe a world-class performer. But before you do that, you have to do some research to get yourself ready. What makes them world-class? And you get on and you need to find resources that, one, make you believe that they're the best in the class. We certainly don't study the worst in the class. We want to be better than the best. So part of our searching is who's the best in this field. All right, so that's all a search all by itself. Then as you're searching, you might find out, well, what made them the best is that they have this new piece of equipment, or they have this process that's very different than what you do. And from there, it leads you down more research roads. And that's what you're doing during secondary research. You're just trying to get your game face on. All you know is your process. You're a subject matter expert in it, but now you're going to go exploring. You're on a walkabout, and you're going to figure out who's the best in the field, and then what are the things that we can learn about them before we actually physically visit them. So this work's done generally online, or it's found through the use of databases or specialized search engines. All right, so the general categories of secondary benchmarking sources, they're usually free, although you're paying for it. You call it an IT fee, and I'll show you your database here in a minute if you haven't used it, and we'll do a couple of searches. All right, so Google, if you're using Google, you should be using Google Scholar. But sometimes in business, they don't have you don't have like Google Business. So you have to look for your business models using regular Google. If you're looking for academic support for what you're trying to prove, you should be on Google Scholar. And then we have our search engines, which are ABI, and then we also have ProQuest, and I'll show them to you here in just a minute. Hard copy published information such as books, articles in the libraries or tech centers. Those are good sources as you're looking for new technology or benchmarking standards on how to measure things within your company. And sometimes your own company will have access to other benchmarking studies within the company. They can share them with you, or they might have access to other databases. And of course, some companies, and UTC, you certainly come to mind in this, is that a lot of your information is proprietary, and it's only available to you at your work. All right, so we're saying secondary data can come from many sources. We said library search engines. So one of the things that you need to do this week, and it's in your DQ2, is to look at your local library. And this is everybody at NGS does this, whether you're a bachelor's, master's, or a doctor's student. The whole idea here is that you have database accessibility as long as you're in this school, but as soon as you graduate, well, you lose that accessibility. But meanwhile, you pay taxes in your hometown, and most likely your local library has access to the same database as NGS does. And so we'd like all students to go out and see if they can find these databases at the local library. Usually while you're doing that, you simply have a library card and you log on to your local library, and guess what? All those databases are probably sitting right there. So by the time you're done with this short little DQ exercise, you now have access to ProQuest that'll follow you for beyond your studies here. Other databases too, many others. I live in San Diego, and I have at least 24 databases that I can access away from NGS. Also, some of you might have kids in other colleges. I had 2 going to San Diego State while I was going through my DBA program. So I was able to jump onto their library and use about 100 different databases. But anyway, for you, you're not going to need that for what we're doing this week. The databases we have here at NGS and Google Scholar will work for you to deliver on the searches you have to do. If you belong to APQC, they have a nice database as well. In fact, you'll be taking a finance course next class, which requires you to have a textbook that's available on APQC. All right, so if you go to that website, and you should look at, if you even have access to your syllabus right now, I think the book's like $40, and I think membership to the site's like $25. So if you buy the membership, you get the book at a super discounted rate. Then all of a sudden you have like a year-long access to all their library materials at the APQC site. So look at your syllabus for your next course and look for the textbook you need for that. It's really a pretty good deal. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump out of the presentation here. Hopefully by now you've all been onto these research sites. Make sure I'm logged in correctly. There it is. Student resources. Actually, let me bring up your course here at home. So this is you. If you just look on our course materials page, you'll have a library resources tab on the right-hand side. You hit your library resources tab, and it's going to bring you up these databases. For doing your secondary research, besides doing Google Scholar, or your work access databases, these ones work very well here. First of all, you have this ABI Inform collection. These are full text, peer-reviewed journals. So when you go into this one, you would simply click the login, and here's your password. Mine, it'll remember it for me because I've been in here. So you put NGS in there and your password, and then you log in. All right, if you notice up here, it says ProQuest. So when I come into this one here, I don't want to look at everything that ProQuest has because I'm into the articles here. So I just hit the databases on this banner. It says 2. What I do is I unclick ProQuest. It's going to give me too much stuff. I just want to go with ABI. So I want to use just that database. All right, now I come to a search screen. All right, now, for me, let's say we can do military readiness because we know that's one of your topics. All right, so I just hit military readiness, and it just came back with 77,192 results. It's like, oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. All right, but there it is. You can start with that, and you'll now be pulling up articles that relate to military readiness. All right, for me, I want to neck it down a little bit, and you can do that simply by putting parens around it, which says I just want exact matches for military readiness. All right, so it dropped down to 5,700 results, still too many, but maybe the next thing I want military readiness, and I'll put an and I'm going to do some parents and aircraft. This is how you go about secondary research. So I had 5,700 results. Now I'm down to 1,500 results. All right, I can keep going on this. I can say C-130. I can say search and rescue. I can keep the whole line going as long as I want. But the idea is at some point you might start digging into one of these. You simply open it up, and you'll have a full text article here. And what's good with sometimes just stopping and looking at one of these, you may not even read the whole thing, is you'll read portion of it looking for anything that's related to readiness. I see aircraft. That's all I'm getting in this one. So I might be done with this because I don't see and readiness. But this might give me another way to look for other keywords to help me in my search. All right, that's ABI. That's giving me just articles. The next database you have is LexisNexis. So this is a business articles rated and financial reports. For you, maybe not so good on what we have to do here, but LexisNexis is it's an interesting database. Maybe you can get some things out of it. When you go to your finance class, I would be working from there. I just put in terrorism, and now it's showing me all the articles that it's relating from there. And then you can see over on the side, it's showing me where the articles are coming from. I might want to neck that down to just magazines and journals. I could just click that now, and it's going to drop me down to just those 4 articles that are from the journals. Now I can look at that subject only there. It's much quicker than Google Scholar, much quicker. The next database you have is ProQuest. All right, so we were just in ProQuest a minute ago, but when I come down and hit the dissertations and thesis, in the previous one that I showed you, I told you to unclick it because you can come here and search just in this database by itself. So over here, I would do the same thing. Let's try military readiness. Military readiness. Went for the exact quote. You can see there's 2,100 results, and these are full-on dissertations here. So what was good about looking in a dissertation is that we'll just click on this one right here. It's not, I wouldn't be interested in this in what you guys are doing, but what I want to show you here is that you can get this thing called abstract and details here. An abstract gives you, just like the abstracts you write in your paper, it's a small, what this paper is about. But usually, I don't start there. I come on down looking for keywords. There it is, identifier, keyword science. This one doesn't have anything for me that's interesting, but sometimes you'll come in here and you'll find other ways to look at military readiness with other people's keywords, and then you click on it and it's going to take you to those new keywords, which might open a door for you. Look, secondary research is tedious. It's about trying to go deep. You're trying to be an inch wide and a mile deep on a subject. That's what secondary research is all about. You're trying to find something, a nugget down there that's making a company be better than yours. All right, those are the databases that's available to you just by clicking the library link off of your course materials here. Any questions on using our library resources before we go on? All right, jumping back into the presentation. Actually, someone give me a mic check. Know that I'm still alive.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so earlier I showed you assignment 1, which is the team assignment that's going to hopefully break it down into keyword searches for you. And you'll divvy up your research items to the team members. All right, assignment number 2 is individual. All right, so this isn't due until is it week 4? I have it in here as we get going. All right, so we have this individual assignment 2, secondary researching. So what you're going to do is you're going to use a template, which I'll jump out. No, actually, I think I have it in here in a couple slides. I do. All right, you're going to use a template, and you're going to start going down that rabbit hole, that inch wide, mile deep, and you're going to look for an item that you think is worthy of consideration for your MVP. That doesn't mean it's going to be used at all. It's just where your secondary research has taken you. And every student develops 6. So like if you're in the team of 5, you're going to have 30 of those to look at in the end. And then you're going to call the best of the group out for your final presentation. We'll talk more about that here a little bit later. But anyway, you're going to use the template, which is coming up. You're trying to identify some kind of comparison for use in your MVP analysis. That means that you're in the secondary road. What are the things that can help us make our future state better? So you're trying to find the enablers. You're not trying to find the things that are wrong with your process. You're trying to find the best practices that other people might be doing that you are not doing. So you're trying to identify that plus further research or primary benchmarking opportunities. So like I say, if you're an aircraft person looking at readiness, you're probably wanting to compare yourself against another squadron or another organization who does the same work. But you through secondary research, you might find that San Diego Gas and Electric maintains a heavy lift crane helicopter that can suck up 5,000 gallons of water in 1 minute and deliver it to a fire. They're on standby for the fires out here in California, and they have a readiness requirement. So that's how secondary researching would end up working. How do you get that connection to San Diego Gas and Electric? Well, sometimes it's about what you know or what you see in the paper. Certainly right now, California is on fire. So how do they go about putting that out? It's usually through tankers. Those people are sitting ready to go with some kind of readiness posture. All right, so if I'm a team has to work about aircraft readiness, well, suddenly I'm interested in them. That's how secondary benchmarking works. That's being creative. That's out of the box. And that's where we hope that you will go with your secondary benchmarking. All right, this is the criteria for your template. So you'll fill out the template. Again, I'll show you the template as we go, and certainly before the end of class. I'm sure I have it here in a couple of slides, but if not, I'll pull it up on the out of our course materials. So you simply complete the template, and these are the grading criteria that we're doing here. We really would like you to use the search engines that you have available to you here at NGS. And I showed you ProQuest and LexisNexis. Those are two. And the ABI form is also another good one. And this is due 10/24. We'll certainly talk more about this next week. This is only a commercial break for your team assignment that's due in week 5. So after we do the individual assignments, we will share that back with all the team members. And then you'll meet as a team on week 4, and you will decide amongst all the secondary research you've done what you think the best of it is, and then you'll present a couple of slides back to us on week 5 of secondary research that you might take forward into your MVP. And that's usually what one of the big takeaways from this course is. You have these other data points to look at for your MVP. More to follow on this exact assignment as we go forward. All right, so I want to talk about benchmarking alliances for a little bit. Next week we'll bring up integrity and ethics issues related to benchmarking, but these folks, American Management AMA, American Management Association, the biggest one right below is American Productivity and Quality Center, APQC, then ASQ right under it. Those two are websites you could go to, and you could do all kinds of research for free on their sites regarding secondary researching. So these are different places to go for benchmarking alliances. So these are people that are third party. They're not related to your benchmarking or maybe even your target, but these are folks that might give you further insight into the process. All right, so the secondary benchmarking planning, and here's your summary slide. Although secondary benchmarking is an individual assignment for this course, the MVP works together to plan the work to ensure the best possible coverage of the appropriate topics is attained. So I think all I'm saying in this bullet here is that each individual student is going to go out and do 6 of these secondary searches individually, then we bring it back to the group and we bring the best of the best to the final set of slides. All right, so planning for secondary benchmarking is an iterative process. This simply means that you're going to go out there, you're going to show us something next week, and then you're going to say, ooh, there's something better that we could have done. That's okay. You make changes on the fly as you go. What you're hoping to find is you want to get your research team going on something. It's like a writer's block. Secondary researchers have it all the time. They don't know what to look for. And you have to discover as a team where to start looking. Okay, so as a reminder, this is the sheet that we are doing this week as a team. You'll fill this out and deliver it to the Dropbox in the next week on what your potential topics are, maybe even your keywords, and who on the team will further investigate that as we go into the next assignment, which is the individual secondary research assignment. All right, we're shifting gears now. So we're talking about primary benchmarking. So secondary's only been what you do on your chair in front of a computer looking for information, or if you go down to a library and you're looking for hard copy, or if you go to your Works Library Center and you're looking for information on other companies. Primary benchmarking, it's your target. It's the other company you're going to do, or it's the other division within your own company that you're going to do. So this is what we're shifting into now for primary benchmarking. So you actually have to contact the other organization for the purposes of exchanging information. And last week, Matthew had brought up, how do you get other people to open the door for you? Well, that's the hardest part. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Maybe a company belongs part of the APQC. So I showed you that a couple slides ago. And they're willing to open their door and let you benchmark them, but it's tit for tat. And how that works and what that means is that when you do your benchmarking, you have to show 100% of your results to that other company. So in other words, you can't go in there and raid their knowledge locker and then not share your information back with them. Sometimes company will allow you to do that. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes you're not going through the door. And look, the times you have to go through another company's door is usually when you're on a competitive benchmark. So very hard to get into another company's inner workings so that they can give away their proprietary information on that's going to make you a better company. That just isn't going to happen. But more likely what's going to happen is you're going to do the functional benchmark, where you're just looking at one item or one process. Maybe it's an environmental containment piece of a process, and another company is willing to share that data with you. And you contact them, they let you in the door, and then you do the benchmark. All right, so primary benchmarking can be done many ways. It can be done by telephone, a conference, a video call, physically visiting. That's always the best way to do it. Go see with yourself. That's called Gemba. If you guys also know you have access to Gemba University. Gemba means to walk around your organization. So it means to go out and see for yourself. All right, it's done through surveys or interviews or questionnaires. We're going to talk more about them in the next couple of slides here. All right, it requires application of the code of conduct. Next week we will cover that. If you were actually going to go out and do a benchmark, you bring the code of conduct up. You sign it, they sign it, and you'll have a champion at the other organization that will let you in the door with your questions. So primary benchmarking, they're saying, often provides a rich experience and information that far exceeds secondary benchmarking. I agree. When I've done mine, you're only looking at the internet. You think that something's better, only to find out that, well, the reason they got it so much better is because they have 5 times as many employees as I do. And until you get in and compare yourself to that other company directly, you're not going to know for sure if your secondary idea has any validity to it. So we developed a plan for selecting the primary benchmarking partner. All right, so right now, you know what you have. You're a subject matter expert of what's wrong in your organization. Now you're trying to figure out who to benchmark against. So you'll find best in class, usually through a secondary research, or simply your boss may know, or you may just know, or a friend may know who the best of the best is when it comes to first pass yield rate, or battery life, or non-destructive inspections. It's how you get there is one of these ways here. Maybe even a customer or supplier might know. I don't know if I believe the LinkedIn one or social media for this, but okay. Maybe you're on LinkedIn and you read one of the articles there, and it could lead you to a primary benchmarking partner. All right, so when you're picking somebody, like I say, you're not going to pick the worst in class. You need to pick the best in class. I'm going to start on my bottom bullet down there. Look at the worst in class to learn lessons. Look, you could waste your time walking into another company, because your time is valuable, to learn what they did wrong. On those, we want to get case studies. We want to read about it through journals. So I would never recommend as a primary benchmark to go do the worst in class so you can figure out what not to do. You're already better than them. So what you really want is the best in class, so that you can understand the gap. That gap is between your best performance and their best performance. All right. So here's our criteria. We'll go back up the top. So we want to determine their value and potential contributions to the project. Well, for you C-130 guys, if they got a C-130 and they have to make it ready, well, there's a valuable contribution. There's somebody that I can compare an apple to an apple with. So they're probably pretty valuable to you. All right, ease of gaining access, especially if it's like say an Air Force squadron to another one, it's going to be pretty easy for you to get in there. All it takes is one of your bosses to say, let's go get this done, and it's going to happen. All right, the next part is the availability of their personnel. All right, at the time the benchmarking has to be done. Sometimes that gets to be a tricky part. You just have to negotiate that up front. We'll come in November. No, we're not going to do November because we got the holidays. How about December? No, it's going to have to be more like January. And that's truly how benchmarking works. It needs to be done at the convenience of the organization that you're targeting, not you. Yeah, you might want to get it done quickly, but they're the ones nice enough to open the door. If you're insistent and since we're all military, you're just going to go do it, well, it makes the other people biased that you're getting ready to question. They don't want to participate, and it creates sometimes false data. Then the logistics and travel funds. Your benchmarking charter should actually say that if you're a team of 3 and we're going to travel to the other coast, you would actually have already put those travel costs into the cost of doing the benchmarking, plus your hourly rate goes in there. Code of conduct challenges, next week we'll talk about that. And then of course you really need to scope it down to what you want to do. You do generic, internal, strategic, or competitive. I showed you this slide earlier. Like I say, sometimes this shows up in the first team assignment there. They'll give me the questions they're working on, but they're also trying to think about who they might want to benchmark. So here's this survey, but I want to show you in the next one. This will make it a little more clear for you. So here's one that's filled out. All right, so we're looking at potential primary partners, and then how we're going to select them. So if you look over here, potential partner, the very first one says, hey, there's Woodward. All right, it would be a competitive benchmark. We could get them on the phone and a site visit. They're friendly to us. We would expect them to cooperate. It says high to 3. And if you can see down below, it's showing you that they're only on a scale of 1 to 3. So likely to get in the door. Their relevance is going to be high, and they might have something for us to break through. So they're doing some scoring out here. So this is much like a customer's requirements matrix. You're just getting each of these areas and assigning a value to it, and then say, well, looks like Woodward would be our best benchmarking partner. You try and target them. Be great to go to Boeing, but you're not likely to get in the door. So that's what's happening here. The level of cooperation expected is a 2. I bet you it's more like a 1. So that's how this form looks when it's filled out. Like I say, some teams present that right away in assignment 1. If you do it, that's great. I don't expect it. Where it's helpful is, especially when you have a large team like 5 people in it, you've got to, at the end of this next week when you put this together, you have to have enough meat for all 5 team members to go out and start doing secondary research. Okay, so here we are. We're lucky enough to get in the door, or on the telephone, or video conference with another group. So when you go in there, you only get one bite at the apple. You can't come back and ask questions after you've left. Oh, hey, just one more question. Oh, one more question. You have to have your ducks in a row going in. So this is why benchmarking takes a while. In fact, it might take months to get these surveys done correctly. So here's the methods that you're trying to use for your data collection. Surveys are good because you can put a numeric quantity to it, and you can have a qualitative and quantitative number assigned to the questions. I'll talk more about that here in a little bit. Questionnaires, there you can score them as well, but questionnaires get a little bit they're interpretive. So if you ask somebody a question and they write you a paragraph on it, well, you have to interpret that. And when you're doing this times 30, sometimes you're spending a lot of time just trying to interpret what the question means and trying to put a value to it. So questionnaires have a value. We'll talk about that as well in some coming slides. Telephone poll, okay. That would be a low-level qualitative event. You're usually yes, no type answers, and you're writing down everything yourself. Focus groups are usually popular. You go into the other company, you might want to talk to their quality action team or their QA folks, and you could focus on a part of it if you want. But what happens really instead of a focus group is that you have an interview. So really the 3 most prominent types are surveys, questionnaires, and interviews. So when you're in interviewing, what you're trying to learn from is first that you're interviewing the right person. You may not want to interview a production line member who's stamping out parts. You might want to interview the management or the leadership of the company that can describe the process, so that you can try and look for the variations between your process and theirs. Although going to the floor and visiting the person working on the floor, you can see what they're doing, and maybe you'll observe them doing something different than your own process has. But what I'm telling you here is that surveys are probably best for the workers on the floor. Questionnaires are good for managers, and interviews are good for senior management and above. All right, so how do you design a questionnaire and data collection instruments? All right, so you start with writing out what you need to know. What's our goals here? What do we want to get from this company? I want to improve my readiness. So I need to know about how do they maintain their readiness? What does it take for them to get an aircraft ready? Maybe I need to go so far down as, when an aircraft part breaks, walk me through what it takes to order it, how many people are involved in the loop. So that can be done a couple of ways. One could be done with a questionnaire that's sent out ahead of time that asks you in the questionnaire to the manager, can you describe the process for ordering parts for an aircraft that has a broken part? And you could have that well before you get there if they're willing to share that with you at that point. It lets you focus in on some other questions down the line. So you're trying to figure out what it is you need for data. What are the things I need to know about? What part of the process? You want it to mirror yours, or you want to observe some process that is going to get them into a state of readiness that you will envy and you want to mimic. You're looking for the odd duck out. What is it they're doing that's better than you? So, and you can't ask it that way. What are you doing that's better than me? You don't ask questions like, do you like your company? Those are dependent variables that you can't compare to your company. And I'll talk about that here in a minute as well. So determining what the best questions are to ask, you work it as a group, and usually what happens is you're developing your questionnaires and your surveys, and all the team members are putting in 20, 30 items, and then you're culling that down to maybe 20 items that you're going to ask them. And the idea is to have it all standardized so that if you have 3 people going to do the interviews, is that everybody asks the same question the same way, so that it can only be interpreted one way. It's absolutely critical in benchmarking that you follow this top bullet here, is that when you go to a company to benchmark, is that you're dividing the process into parts. Ask about the steps as well as the final outcomes. If you're comparing your line to someone else's line, you don't come into the company and say, how do you go between this step and that? Don't ask that. You just want them to describe their steps. And then you're looking for what's different. And then when you find the differences, if you're in a focus group, then you can start dwelling into, well, this is a little different than how we do it. And then you start comparing at that point. All right, so you have this thing that says hypothesize factors that may influence the quality of a process. And this could be something as simple as this, is that your company is in a part of the country where getting people to even come work for you is very hard to do. And you're benchmarking yourself against another part of the country where they have an abundance of workers, and the workers that they have are highly trained. So even though you're not there to look at the quality of worker, you observe that during the benchmark. Say, wow, these people really have it going. All right, so your hypothesis then becomes this, is that, well, because this other line has highly educated floor workers, they're able to produce a higher quality rate. All right, now you can't simply just prove that on that. All you can take away is that, well, how did they do that? How did they hire these people that had more education than the others? And is there something that we can learn from that? So it's a hypothesis that you try to bring back as a best practice. I'll talk more about that here when we open up another PowerPoint. All right, we've already talked about identifying areas from secondary benchmarking. You'll have had this whole list, and you're going to try and get to it while you're there. We'll talk about that in Almar next week as well. What I want to do over here in your course materials, there's three PowerPoints. One's called Constructing Qualitative Surveys. The other one is Difference Between Variables, and then the Likert Scale. I'm going to open the Likert Scale. I'm only going to talk about it for a minute. Maybe you had the chance to look at this before class. But the Likert Scale is just a cool thing to use when you're out benchmarking. And this particular one's giving you some different ways to look at a Likert Scale. They're showing 1 through 5 this way. They're showing 1 through 5 this way. I'll tell you, when you go out and do it, having a sheet like this one right here is really an easy way for a survey respondent to answer questions. So it says you're trying to measure this, and then it's asking you what you think about each of these items as you go along here. 1 being least, 5 being most. And that should always be the way you construct your Likert scale, from left to right, least to most. All right, try and keep yourself in a positive pattern. The 5 being you wouldn't want to say number 1, how much do you hate your work? 5. You don't want to do questions like that. You want to know, is my boss supportive of me? And 1 would be no. That's why I hate my work. But that's telling me this. I can do something about, does my boss give me explain my expectations? And if everybody answers 1, no, we can go fine tune that boss so that he's more explaining of what is going on. But if you had a question here that says, I hate my job, there's nothing I can do for you. That is called a dependent variable, because what makes you like or dislike your work has nothing to do with that survey question. Meanwhile, these other questions that we rack up around it might be things that we can do to make your workplace better. All right, and that's what they're doing in this particular survey, is they're getting around the parts that they can measure. And when they're done, they can take these, and 1's worth 1 and a 5's worth 5, and they can determine how well you're doing in a against a dependent variable. I'll talk about that here in just a minute. More examples of the Likert scale. Here's one that I don't see used very much. Most NGS students, and certainly all of our doctoral students, will use this 1 to 5 up here because we need to walk away with quantitative data. If I have a 1 to 5 scale, I'm getting quantitative data. The scale here might be more qualitative, but I could probably come in and score this out. Not easy for the researcher to score it though. So here's a Likert scale that goes up to a 9. You could do that. Most Likert scales go to a 5. You really don't need much more than that to start doing some scoring. I got some more explanation on Likert, and we no longer do ANOVA for you in this course because it's been shortened by a week. All right, so there's your Likert scale. Next, I want to open up difference between variables. If you haven't looked at this PowerPoint, you should take the time to do it because researchers will often confuse the difference between a dependent variable and an independent variable. Just in a nutshell here, a dependent variable is something you cannot influence. Like for example, let's say your score for this course. I cannot influence your score for this course because it's made up of 5 different assignments and your participation. What I can influence is the assignments and the participation and how we deliver that information to you. I can observe the final score you get, but you get the final score because of these independent assignments that are happening on the side. All right, so to look at a little bit more. I'm not going to go through these. We don't have the time to go through all this, and it's not really part of the course. This is in Almar, you're going to have to produce 5 questions each student, and this is a good place to go and see if I've got my variables right. So in the math world, we have an X and a Y axis. To remember your axes, X means across, X means across. This is your independent variable. Your y-axis is your dependent variable. I'll show you what this is here in just a minute. We are trying to get stuff that we can measure on a graph. We're doing benchmarking. We're trying to get to some kind of analytic end state. So know that independent variables influences the change in the dependent variable. So if you looked at it, how I just told you on the earlier example, your assignments influence the change on your final grade. So I can't do anything about the final grade. It's all about these assignments. Now looking down here. All right, so here's a dependent variable. And what we're trying to do is find a relationship. You know, if we say something's going to change, this is where we're going to measure it. I'll just show you a couple slides on that. So if you're looking here, this is showing foreclosures in number of household units. What they're saying is that the more units that are in an area, the more foreclosures they are. So, so in this area, there's few household units, so there's few foreclosures. Makes sense. There's a positive slope. That means that the more units there are, the more foreclosures there are. But it's not always a positive slope to tell your story. For example, this is the percent of people who have college education and the unemployment rate. So what we're saying is the higher education you have, the less unemployment you have. So this is a negative slope, but it still has a positive meaning, meaning that you need to have education not to be unemployed. So not the best way to have a data presented. And if you were working with me in another program, we would find a way to change that around. And then here we have stuff with no education or no relationship. All right, percent of college education, people that own pets. Look, it's all over the place. All right, so there's no relationship. An example of a negative slope that shows good news. In other words, that is the unemployment rate changes, economic rate growth rate will change as well. All right, here's a weird one. All right, this is a number of typos found. All right, so if you have a book with 8 chapters in it, you're going to have about this many, and it makes sense. That's a positive relationship. The more chapters there are in the book, the more typos you're going to have. It makes common sense, but you've got beyond the word common sense. It's only qualitative when you make a statement that goes like this. The more chapters in a book that you have, the more typos there's going to be. That's a qualitative statement. A quantitative statement is this. If you have 8 chapters in a book, you're going to have an average of 11 typos in the manuscript. Now you've come from qualitative to quantitative. And that's always what we want to do. All right, so you have this whole PowerPoint here. You can kind of look at the difference between independent and dependent variables. And then lastly, and most importantly for you, the one I've been waiting to spring on you to the very last, is constructing qualitative surveys. So in this particular PowerPoint, I just try and talk to you a little bit about employees, what's a good number of questions to ask them. And in here, I've dumped all the questions that I've asked on surveys over the last 10 years. And then I've tried to break them down into 2 things. We're trying to measure satisfaction. It's not easy to measure satisfaction, So it's all about the variables. All right, so we have a dependent variable is unactionable. It's like your final points for this course. It's unactionable. I can't do anything about it. All right, so here's some example of these unactionable things. I'm very satisfied with my job. I can't help you with that. I'm highly committed to the organization. Can't help you with that either. I would recommend this organization, friends and family. These are things that I cannot do as a manager or a leader. All right, here's another one. I'm actively looking for a job. Nothing I can do about any of that. All right. So we want to come up with things that are actionable. So from slide 8 on, we've taken and reversed all that stuff so that now you can get to some questions that might lead to find out why a person is not happy, why a person is looking for another job. All right. And so if you look at these and you get over a little bit, you'll see opportunities for growth. All right. So these are some standard questions that I ask when I'm looking for growth opportunities. Here's a slide up here. Here's about feedback. All right, so like for example, this becomes an independent variable because if I put this on a Likert scale of 1 to 5, and I ask an employee, I receive useful constructive feedback from my manager on a scale of 1 to 5, and I put that out to 100 people, and it comes back with an average of 2.2, that tells me my manager is not giving good feedback. Now I can change that. I can go to the manager. Hey manager, here's some 360 feedback for you. You're not giving enough feedback. So how about it? All right, so I can make a change there. So that's what the whole idea with all these questions are, is you're trying to get something that you can score and that would be useful to your benchmarking and asked in a way that's not going to offend people, and it gets to the heart of what you're looking at. So each of these each slide offers you a different topic. Work-life balance, customer focus, fairness, mission and purpose, respect for management. These are all tough subjects, and so here they are for you. Have fun with them. If you use them or it inspires you to add more, send them my way. I look forward to seeing them in your presentations as the course goes on. All right, we're doing well on time here. Back to the PowerPoint. All right, so if you're interviewing, these are some tips for your interview. Boy, it's really important if you can get anonymity and into your questions. So if you're asking someone to fill something out, it'd be nice for them to be able to do so without having to put their name on it. It lets them be as honest as they can. If they had to put their name on it, they may not. They may only answer along the company lines. And that's not going to help you explore what's wrong within a process. If you're going to do a interview or group, 50 to 60 minute sessions is a lot, right? Oops. If you're doing the questions, you're asking one question at a time. You as a team have to constitute what an adequate response is, or else you have to not accept the response that you're getting for the interview. Make sure that any questions you ask can only have one interpretation. If you're gearing your questionnaire to the production floor, make sure it's just aimed at the process at hand. If you're at management and you're looking at finances, perhaps it's just aimed at the financial piece. They may not know anything about the process. So you might have to have separate questionnaires to achieve different results within the same benchmark. Just depends on where they're at departmentalized or stovepipe-wise within the organization. Here's some response choice dimensions. I showed you in the Likert scale, the 1 to 5. Here's some more opportunities. You could say, how often does something happen? You could have it on a 1 to 5 on importance there. Priorities, frequency. Feelings are the hardest things to deal with because those are almost always dependent variables. Anytime you have a dependent variable, you really can't do much with it. Goodness and quality is another hard one as well. Do you think you produce a good product? It's only a yes or no, even on a scale of 1 to 5. That's not going to, you need, instead of producing a good product, does our production line have quality assurance member checks on a scale of 1 to 5? No, there's something you can do about that. So whenever you ask questions, it's always try and think of your question. If they answer poorly to this question or negatively to it, can I then do something to the organization to change? All right, we talked a little bit about qualitative. Quantitative data is simply going into these interviews and surveys and questionnaires and scoring them out. Likert is good for the scale of 1 to 5. Interviews can be converted into a 1 to 5. Earlier you saw when they were trying to select benchmarking, they only used a scale of 1 to 3 to score it out. You as a team decide what the numbers are that you're going to use for your scoring. All right. And if you can get any of your questionnaires into an easy scoring technique, especially when you're using the Likert scale and they're just circling something, it is so easy for the researcher then to put that data into a table. And then you can start looking at that data to see if there's a correlation, positive or negative, to a dependent variable. And I'll talk to you more about that next week when we get to it. In fact, I'm going to present you tables. And it'll be interesting to see what you do with the data you're presented. All right, this is by far the hardest part, is where it's comment analysis. So you've gone out and you've interviewed 40 people and you have these long paragraphs from each of them. If you're doing a qualitative or quantitative, qualitative means how good is this, and quantitative, well, here's your number. Usually on comment analysis, it is hard to make it into a quantitative number. So usually you'll come back with different categories and then try and show how many of these fit into each category of satisfaction. Not easy to do. And again, something more we'll talk about next week. All right. We're down to literally the last couple of slides in this presentation. So I'm gonna open up the Almar, then I'm gonna come back and look at these questions, even though I think it's in the case study. All right. I need to show you that before we're done too. All right, someone give me a sound check. I'll just make sure I'm still online.
Loud and clear, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, so here you have it. Almar Part 1's up there in your course materials. You should print it out. And I want you to know that there's no trickery here. It's just, there's not one answer that's going to fit. You might know the author. I wrote this thing here earlier last year as a method for you to think about primary benchmarking and the things that are going to go into it. Here, hold on a second. I got literally a murder of crows over the top of my house right now. If you can hear them or not, they're going. It's like the birds out here. Hold on. That's crazy. All right. I don't know if you heard it or not. That was nuts. But anyway, I'm back with you now. All right. So we wrote this so that students could look at primary benchmarking since you don't physically have to do one. And what we do is two parts here. Part 1 is an individual effort. So we want to take what's happened here in lesson 1 and 2, and as individuals, we want you to start thinking about how would you package up benchmarking? How would you prepare for it? How would you get ready to have your team go out and do it? So when you read Almar, I don't know anything about paint. So I just went to Google and I started learning about paint. And I would try to make it as generic as I could. And I give you a process of how our paint company works and giving you some steps here to look at. All right, then I also come through and talk about the company's throughput, how fast can they get stuff done, and then things for you to start thinking about as you start preparing to run your benchmark. So every sentence has something in it. Right up in here, though, you're looking at the different parts of this production line. So there's some improvement that might be able to be done. For us, we're very lucky because we have an identical plant on the other coast. We're on the West Coast. We're going to do the East Coast for comparison. So there's enough information in here for you to go out and maybe do some secondary research, or at least make some recommendations for secondary research. I'm telling you, it's just loaded with things that are that could be done better. Read each paragraph a couple times, and then you come back and you answer your questions. So the questions. Let me just go back to the PowerPoint. All right, so we're going to answer the following questions based on the case study. So this is your Almar that's due next week. This is not an APA paper. You just open up a Word document and you can just start answering the questions. You'll see them in the back of the Almar case study, and you'll just title it Almar Responses. All right, so I want you to determine what our outcome is, what's the key outcome. Indicate any performance gap that you can identify. Indicate whether it's an operational, or strategic, or functional, or competitive. Obviously, I didn't offer you generic, and I didn't offer you, what's the other one? Functional, competitive, generic. I've lost my mind. So you just pick which one you think it is of this group here, and we know it's either going to be one of these two with one of these two for data, maybe both for data. We'll see. All right, recommend topics that may be included in secondary written benchmarking. Make a list of documents, reports, and other organizational data that you would ask your sister plant for prior to conducting the interview. What kind of stuff do you need from them? Make a list of personnel by job position type that you would want to interview. Indicate the topics that you would ask. indicate if you would do any group interviews. If so, who would it be? All right, and then the hardest part of this whole case study is 5 questions. You need to develop, every student needs to develop 5 questions. What would you ask? So you had the PowerPoint out there that shows you some Likert scale, how to do that. You need to maybe show me a couple of those. What kind of interview question would you ask? What kind of survey question would you ask? So of the 5 questions, include at least one that's a Likert scale based, one that's open-ended, and one that is a multiple choice. So on an open-ended question, I just did not tell you what it was, but it simply goes like this. Can you describe your process of mixing paint? Open question. Where a closed one would be, do you like working here? Simply yes or no answer at that point. And it's also in these slides over here. All right, any questions on Almar? Any questions on the topics we've discussed tonight? All right, I've reached the end of the session for this evening, and it's that part where I hang around to answer your questions until you're satisfied. Otherwise, I'll see you online or on email as appropriate. Just note for your Almar Paint Company case study, most students need to put about 2 hours into this. So you have your reading of it, take a highlighter, try and get the best out of all that information, have your questions next to you, and you can get through this thing in about 2 hours. Next week, I will give you questions that I devised. In the part 2 study, it pretends that we've come back from our primary benchmark, and now we go into analytics. So next week, that's where we're going to start going. It's how do we analyze the data we receive back.
And you said the individual one for the Almar didn't require an APA format, correct?
No, if you want to do it that way, you're welcome to. But no, really, I just need the answers back on this one. You guys have a bit of work to do this week, so I don't want to tie you up in APA style.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for that. Thank you.
Hey, APA rules though, okay? It's the bomb.
Awesome. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir. Have a good night.
You too, sir.
Have a good night, everyone. Cheers.
I'm sorry, sir. My phone kicked me off. Did you say this Almar doesn't have to be APA style?
It does not.
Okay. I didn't catch it because it kicked me off.
Sorry, but yeah, no, it doesn't have to be unless you want to do it that way.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Anybody left online?